I think what they're trying to do is basically say, look, what came before us was so bad. This is why you've all got to suffer a little bit. But we're not going to make it any worse for you. So that's the logic they've had to follow. I mean, the overall story is growth is down, spending is up, taxes are up. So it's all sugar-coated. And it doesn't sound too bad. But if you dig into the details, I mean, there are things that are going to hit people straight away.
Go. Right, Joe, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
I've been trying to get myself into the UK community recently because I've stopped traveling to the US, and obviously we met online, as you do.
Yeah.
I am probably like you, a little bit concerned about the trajectory of our country at the moment, and certainly concerned about the budget today.
Yeah. I mean, it could be the first communist budget we've had in a while, couldn't it? I don't like to mince words when it comes to what the Chancellor's doing. But no, on a serious note, I think this is the beginning of what we've been talking about for a long time, right? With central bank digital currency, creeping ideas about social credit, all of this stuff. It's quite sort of pernicious and soft communist, I would say. It's certainly going to create a much more of a class divide over the next few years, particularly on things like inheritance tax. And, it'll be interesting to see how the public reacts. I don't know if the public has lost interest in politics altogether, or if they're a little bit angry right now. We'll have to see how they react. But I don't think whatever's in it isn't going to make anyone happy. It's going to have effects for the richest in society, the poorest in society, the working class, the farming community. All of them are going to be angry in some way. There's kind of nothing in it for anybody who's working, which is a bit of a problem.
That's ironic, really.
It's ironic, isn't it? Yeah. But I guess that's how socialism works at the end of the day. You start with promises and you end up with nothing.
I've been, when I first started making my old show, I was definitely a statist, as I would say. I was a government person. I never really thought the ideas of libertarianism, never really heard about it. Now I've been going around calling everyone a socialist. Even to the point where previously, I haven't voted in multiple elections, but I've come to the conclusion that the Conservative Party itself is a socialist party.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'd say they're socialist. I'd say they're globalist, right? Which is an interesting kind of nuance, but I think the difference is one believes in this kind of global hierarchy, and the other one just believes in a top-down authoritarian structure.
Well, I think the Conservative Party had become top-down authoritarian, and the reason I say socialist is, I've been having the argument this morning with somebody. They're like, "Well, it's not socialist. We don't own the means of production." I'm like, when I look at somebody who owns multiple businesses, I look at the regulations, the taxation, I feel pretty owned. I feel pretty owned, pretty restricted in what I want to do. I fear with this budget, people are actually going to lose jobs because of it,
sure.
Which is a weird thing. But I've been throwing around this socialist idea and showing no mercy for it, really, to try and get across to people who I know, who I respect and trust, that these policies aren't good for anybody.
It's all sugar-coated. This is the problem. So the use of language in the last 15, 20 years has become a real problem. For instance, starting with the term socialist itself, that used to have a really bad rep. Right, you were associated with the USSR, you were associated with the Bolshevik regime. There were historical kind of reference points that people could look at, and they could say, okay, we know where that's going. It's happened before. And funny enough, when the USSR tried to instigate riots over here, tried to instigate top-down change, the British people normally just resisted. That even the workers, even the people involved in the former Labour Party, they didn't want to revolt against the structure in this country because it's provided a lot of good. Much as people want to go back in history and bash the empire and the monarchy and all the rest of it, people knew that there was a comfortable kind of feeling about it all. They didn't want to tear this structure down. So we've always escaped communism. And that's a blessing and a curse, because it also means we've got no reference point. If you go to Poland today and you say, would you like to be communist again? I think you'll probably get kicked out quite quickly. Right? They're not going to stand for that kind of language.
Yep.
Over here, it's not a dirty word. Communism isn't a dirty word. It still is kind of in the US. There's a little bit of it, particularly on the right of politics over there. They understand that, and that's a large proportion. Over here, no one really cares. As long as they've still got a paper to read and TV to watch, they're probably not as fussed about what you call yourself politically. And it's this kind of creeping comfort that's come in over the years.
Why do you think that's happened?
I think it's happened because the institutions, which have been largely captured by people who at least have Marxist tendencies deep down, have been very clever with relabeling and repackaging. So things have been given softer names. They don't talk openly about communism as much. There might be certain people like Susan Mitchie who like to still be a member of the Communist Party. But most people see that as a dirty word. And so they don't like to tell you what they are, right? So over the years, particularly with students, they repackage it as something cool. Do you want to go to the Che Guevara Camp Place Fire tonight? Sounds great, doesn't it? But what's actually lying underneath all of that is this kind of softening of history. Well, who was Che Guevara? Oh, he killed people. That's not very nice, isn't it? Well, it's the thing that I love is the way that this has all become amalgamated with other movements. So you've got Palestine marches, you've got communists, you've got feminists, you've got things like the transgender movement and ideology. And all of these movements are completely opposed in some way or other. They're diametrically opposed in most cases. But they've all come together under this one kind of flowery feeling, which is socialism. And this is what they do. They make sure that what they're trying to achieve long term, which is the breakdown of families, society, hierarchy, is covered by social movements. It's covered by a feeling of benevolence, as though, you're doing some good, you're helping out, whatever minority it is today, whoever the flavor of the day is. But actually what they're trying to do is break down the society around them.
I just keep trying to understand why. Like, who's behind this? What are their end goals? Like, why, if you understand the history of socialism, the way it impoverished parts of the world, you talked about the Soviet Union, and we know various parts of Eastern Europe have recovered well since the breakup of the USSR. If you look at GDP growth in old Soviet countries since they've escaped the Soviet clutches, these countries have done very well. Why does this creep back in if history tells us this is evil? Who's driving this and for what? Because I try and think, what's your end goal here? Is it really just legal plunder? They just want to steal from everyone? I just don't understand.
I think it's comfort.
Okay.
So people have this idea. Good feelings, fluffy feelings, right? It's like philanthropy. You give your money to a charity. Now that charity might have a really, really bad rep in a certain part of the world. They might be doing terrible damage in Africa, and they're not telling you about it. But you're giving some money to a charity, so you don't think about that part of it, right? And this is the problem. A lot of people aren't willing to go beyond the surface level. So communists start out benevolent. They think that they're genuinely going to give back. And then at some point throughout their journey, and we've seen this time and time again, they realize, to quote George Orwell, that, 2 legs are better than 4 legs. They started out as one of the animals, and then they want to become one of the humans, because it's quite nice. It's quite nice once you've got all the riches locked up in one central bank, in one central government. And you don't want to let that go, do you? So what I'd say is it's a progressive journey of comfort. You start out by wanting to make other people comfortable, and then you get to the top and you realize you want to make yourself comfortable. So it's kind of a progression, and humans are quite stupid, right? We're all stupid. We all like comforts. We're willing to do something stupid to just be comfortable, right? Let's leave the hot water on a little bit longer, and then, Rachel Reeves will make us freeze with the new tax bill. But that kind of feeling is this discomfort we've got to get back to. Again, I'm going to go back to Poland as a reference point here. They're not afraid to talk about suffering in those cultures, because it's only 1 or 2 generations removed. They've still got people who suffered. They still understand what it was like to not have a meal for a week. We don't have that. We've never had that. That's the problem in this country. We've not really had deprivation in the way that other countries have. And that's a blessing. That's a tribute to the way British society has worked for hundreds of years now. But it's also left us soft. It's left us without... I remember watching one of the North Korean defectors, saying, how could the Ivy League universities be allowing communist indoctrination? Don't they know how bad it is? Well, the answer is no, they don't. They haven't seen it before.
They haven't witnessed it. Haven't lived it.
No.
But that softness, I think that's been pervasive through everything.
Yeah, well, it's moral, it's cultural, it's social, it's anthropological. I mean, it's getting to the point where now people are willing to take out the suffering from every part of life in any way possible, from, whether or not, the arguments about pro-life issues is an example, right, which in the US are raged and debated by everybody from libertarians through to the right wing. I think over in Europe, we've kind of just forgotten about that. We brushed it all under the carpet. It doesn't really matter the way somebody lives and dies. As long as it's not painful, there's no moral argument to consider outside of that.
Well, I think we have stronger legislation here.
Yeah, we do, but we also have less conversation. Right, and I think that's our acceptance of top-down authority in this country is going to be our undoing, because we're not prepared to speak out against it. In France, they'll go and burn a bank down tomorrow.
Well, I also think, sometimes people just want to avoid the argument.
Yeah, it goes back to comfort.
I mean,
it all goes back to this idea that as long as the football's on the weekend, and and you've got something nice in the fridge, it doesn't really matter. But what will happen eventually is that people won't have something nice in the fridge, and they won't have heating, and Granny will be suffering.
Well, it's already happening.
It's happening, isn't it?
It is happening.
Yeah. And I think where I'm from, because I'm from the West Midlands originally, so our county missed out on 3 rounds of levelling up funding. It got to the point where, even though we were considered a relatively affluent county, locals were having to get together to put a pot of money to help old people fund their heating bill during the winter. Local communities, that's not council. Like that's poverty, right, where you're relying on that. And the more that happens, particularly if this budget is as bad as we think it's about to be, then people eventually are going to get pissed off.
Well, I mean, I think we have the reactions where we see the massive, we talked about reform, the massive increase in the vote they got. That to me is a reaction.
Yeah. That's
a reaction to, I think, the Conservative Party not really being a Conservative Party as much anymore, their movement to the centre. I think the riots themselves, I still think, my fundamental belief, the Southall riots weren't really an issue of anger at murder itself. I think we can all be angry at murder. I think we see it, and we've. I mean, how many things? I mean, I'm older than you. I remember the Dunblane shootings. We can all be angry at murder. I also don't think it. I don't think it was an immigration issue. I think this was an issue of frustration with the establishment. I think people have gone through COVID, been locked up. I think they've had their businesses destroyed. I think we've seen increasing taxation. I mean, if you look at the growth of taxation, the percent of GDP has been going up since 1994. And that's a squeeze on people. And I also think then we've been through a period of high inflation due to fiscal irresponsibility. I think it's just a frustration. I think Tommy Robertson, I'm not a fan of in the slightest, but his supporters are a reaction. I think everything right now is a reaction because people are frustrated. You said, but I wonder if people just don't care about politics anymore. I think they just don't know who to vote for.
Yeah, I think everything is political, right? Which is one of the problems, because then you start to, instead of thinking about who's ruling and actually, doing the business of Westminster, which is quite boring, you want to know who's interested in your issue, right? And Tommy has an issue, which, by the way, regardless of the man, is super important. The grooming gangs hasn't been spoken about enough in the mainstream discourse. So naturally... But
that's that fear of having uncomfortable conversations.
It's the fear of having uncomfortable conversations. In fact, Matt Goodwin said this the other day. If the media and political class had actually paid attention to what was happening with the grooming gangs, spoken about them openly and done something about them, there would be no Tommy Robinson today. He wouldn't be necessary because his work would have been done, right? And then he wouldn't have had to suffer, and people who dislike him wouldn't have had somebody to call out. Right, so it's kind of symptomatic. But the root cause is that this new media class, this new political class, and also, it has to be said, this new commercial class now as well, are so weak and so self-serving that they don't actually care about the issues the general population cares about. They don't care about the grooming gangs. They don't care about whether or not the Southport murders happened.
Hold on, do you think... I'll challenge it. I think they care. I think they are...
I'm not saying everybody in those classes doesn't care, but what I'm saying is the overriding feeling is this isn't as important as political capital.
I think it's sure, political capital, but I think it's that fear of pissing people off or being classed as racist, or I just think, I think a lot of people are selfish. I think people are ambitious. And they make decisions based on personal goals in life. And I think they reject maybe they don't have the integrity to attack important issues because they fear what's that going to do for my career. Or
it's kind of a hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah.
Which is that I'm not saying they don't care that somebody's died. Maybe they do. But it's a lot further down their hierarchy of needs than it is on ours. To us, it's like, okay, right, a fellow member of the community has just been stabbed. That's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Somebody's daughter was raped. That's pretty bad. Okay, so to us, it's immediate. We can relate to it. To them, it's like, okay, that's bad. But it'd be even worse if we made these people angry. And it'd be even worse if we got voted out. So let's just think about it in that order rather than the other way around. It's a numbing down of reality. And the problem is with a lot of these people is that they haven't lived much outside of their bubble. We've got a political class now, which I would say is probably the least capable outside of politics that it's ever been.
Did you listen to the? I'm not a huge fan of the rest of politics because they're establishment people. But I listened to their interview they did with John Major, did you hear it?
I saw some clips.
I'm trying to remember the exact detail, but it was something along the lines of, with John Major, it was a very astute observation. He said, historically, conservative politicians either came from business or the military and had achieved something.
Sure.
And Labour politicians had historically come from kind of unions and representation of the working class. He said all these people had experience. He said, right now we have a political class that essentially established itself as a teenager or maybe a student.
Yeah.
And so you have these career politicians who've never built a business, don't understand what it's like to run a business.
No stakeholder in society.
No stakeholder. I mean, as somebody who runs a business, I know full well the extension of employment laws are bad for employees and bad for employers because all you do is you find ways to navigate around them.
Yeah.
I know as somebody, one of my businesses is a bar, the extension of the minimum wage at a time when we are struggling as a business to bring people in because we've had inflationary pressures, that's going to actually cost probably one person a job. And so business rates, I'm trying to open another business at the moment, business rates and the taxes and the regulations, it makes it so hard to create a business. I know as a business owner, this is difficult. If I was a mayor, I would try and eliminate or give as much relief on business rates as I could possibly. I would try and reduce taxation, but these people don't. They constantly see our productivity as something they can take from, but they don't understand the consequences.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines the world's most responsible currency the right way. Because the future depends on it.
Well, they also don't appreciate that the way capital works, which is one of the fundamental problems with Marxism. You can talk about the social implications of it, but they don't fundamentally understand capital flow, right?
Yep.
So without the capital being put up, the worker doesn't get a job. So the worker can't be in competition with the business owner. Business owner, if he wants to take the lion's share, okay, maybe you can talk about whether or not he should be permitted to take the lion's share. But if he puts up the lion's share of the capital, then he's entitled to that. It's like, making a bet, right? You put that money down, you expect to get a return. That's why you made the bet. But the way communists see it, it's like there's this unlimited flow of money at the top. So the only solution really to communist utopia is available to them now in the current present era. This is a really important point because 100 years ago, there was no such thing as digital money. Now there is. So you can make an unlimited flow of money, not based on gold, not based on any other kind of capital except your promise as a central bank, as a central government. And everybody has to believe that that money is there. So this is why it's really interesting to see what the result of this US election is coming up, because Trump's going to take us back to believing that gold exists, which is the way the world has always worked. And if the Democrats win again, they are basically just going to create hyperinflation disguised as making more money. We're not going to have seen anything. We saw a little kind of tremor of it during COVID. We saw it in a way with what Rishi Sunak was doing with spending in this country. But just in absolute layman's terms, we don't have the money to pay people more.
We don't have the money to clear the debt.
Well, our debt is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Our debt is now that I don't think there is a single country who could reasonably say within the next 100 years that they're going to be debt free.
I would put one up as a Bitcoin. I'd say El Salvador.
Sure.
Because they've been...
But they're tapping into what the next stage of currency is going to be. They're doing it early.
Yeah.
None of these other countries are doing that. There's no Bitcoin. The only country that really does this is China, right? Because they have already got WeChat. They've already got a system that they can export to other countries, which is digital.
I don't have as much faith in Trump as you do with regards to tapping into gold. Look, he has had an open position to Bitcoin, but he juiced the markets heavily when he was president last time.
My point is that Trump understands the value of gold.
Yeah.
So because he is a guy who's built his wealth based on debt over the years. So he understands the way the fiscal system works very well, and the people around him definitely do. And so he's not going to want to undo that all overnight. He might have new ideas about the way things are going to work, but it'll be incremental change.
But he does understand that juicing the market is good for political capital, and he did it before.
Yeah.
Like prior to COVID, I think he increased the national debt by 3.9 trillion, and over his administration, it was about the same as what Biden's is going to be. So he definitely juices the market. You could juice the market, share prices up. It's a good message for the market.
But also having actual production as well. So he focused on production as a way to counterbalance that, right? Bringing back production to America.
Sure.
And that is kind of, an admission that you need real capital.
Of course, yeah.
Right.
I mean, look, truth is, I'd be splitting hairs. I think a financial reckoning is coming for the entire West because...
I'm surprised it hasn't happened, to be honest.
Well, I mean, the people I know understand economics. They say you can stretch these economic problems out for a long time. You can squeeze on taxes, you can squeeze on inflation, squeeze on debt. Your Stephanie Keltons of the world completely disagree with the monetary theory, but you can stretch it out for longer than you expect. You can increase the pain over and over again, but a reckoning will come. And the only way to wipe the debt, it can't be paid. It won't come through growth. The only way is through inflation. It's the only way they can get rid of it. So my expectation is this 10, 15% inflation we have will seem pretty small to what's coming.
Yeah. I mean, and also where do we go from there? Regulation is always the solution to a crisis, right? It's like Dick Cheney after 9/11.
Yeah.
Who's going to be the Dick Cheney of the financial world this time round? Because we've just had, so many crises in the last 5 years. It's been one after another nonstop. And every single time there's a crisis of any kind, whether it's health, whether it's economic, whether it's social, there is some kind of legislation that gets pushed through on the back of it. Right?
More debt, more debt, more regulation.
More debt, more regulation. So let's get to the point where there's nothing left. And we really mean that this time. There's nothing left. We can't refill the coffers. So what's going to come next? What do you think? I mean, it's a question for you with your background as well, I guess. What do you think is going to be the state's attempt to regulate Bitcoin, all these kind of alternative currencies? Because it's got to be coming, hasn't it? I don't feel like any of this is outside of their reach.
It depends who's... I think more regulation is likely to come from the Democrats, and Elizabeth Warren has pushed for heavy regulation. The tricky thing about Bitcoin is you can't stop it. It's an unstoppable beast. Yeah. What you can do is you control the access into it and access out of it, the on-ramps and the off-ramps. So you can control that. They've tried... One of the things they really dislike is the self-hosted wallets, is what they call it. The fact is you hold your private keys. I hold my Bitcoin. So go back a step. I lost my bank account with Lloyd's because I got a phone call one day when they phoned me up. I'd been with them for 20 years. And they said, it must have been somebody must have been like 22 years old. They said, we want to run by a couple of transactions with you. I was like, sure, yeah, what are they? And so they raised them and said, what were these? I was like, what? What do you mean, what are they? She's like, well, where have you transferred the money to and why? I was like, So I questioned. I said, "Am I under investigation?" And they said, "No, we just need to know why." I was like, "Well, look, no offense, but I'm a grown man here. I was 41 at the time. I've got 2 kids, got multiple successful businesses. I don't know you, and so it's none of your business. Like, no offense, but do I have to tell you?" And they said, "No." It's like, "Well, it's none of your business. If I was under police investigation, fair enough. What's your probable cause?" But, So anyway, 2 days later, I get a letter, and my bank account's been closed down. And I was like, okay, that's the world we're in. So I now hold the majority of my money in Bitcoin for 2 reasons. One, I want to protect my wealth, but ultimately I'm self-sovereign. I can leave this country and my Bitcoin can't be taken off me because I hold my private keys. I think this is the fear from the Dems, and they will want all Bitcoin transactions in the US on allowed financial rails so they can track know who's got what and tax it. They'll struggle to get rid of it because BlackRock are so deeply involved now. Yeah. So I think the regulation will it will come from the fact that they fear this exit from the current system. We've seen it in the ECB just put out a report recently with fear mongering about Bitcoin. What they fear is people have an alternative to their debasement. And I advocate to everyone I meet is that just go and learn about Bitcoin and understand why this is something you should consider as part of your wealth and part of your wealth protection. And as it allows you to avoid debasement, it puts the position of these government central banks in a position they can't offload their debasement to you. So that's what they feel. I think they will try and control the on-ramps and off-ramps. That's what I think. But I think they'll fail.
Yeah, and it's interesting in this country because I feel like we're normally 5 years behind.
We're massively behind here.
Yeah, and it's sort of exponentially increased since we started talking about national digital currencies as well. I remember reading a white paper a couple of years ago about what we should be doing to try and catch up with the so-called Bitcoin, as opposed to what other countries are doing at the time. And what really scared me was the naivety. It scared me that people at the highest levels of government don't really understand this stuff at all.
Of course they don't.
They don't get it. They don't know how to implement it. And also the other issue we've got here is that there's something that happens in every country, which is grand strategy, right? Which lasts a lot longer than a government does. It lasts 100 years. It lasts 150 years. It's what the people who stay behind the scenes in the halls of power are thinking about long term, which is in this country is the civil service and the monarchy to an extent, although they don't get involved as much anymore. But in these other countries, China in particular, I'm going to use as an example, and what we would call perhaps the deep state in the US, whatever we want to call them. They're going to keep the Democrat Party, but no, I think it's more than that. I think it's I think it's the people who stay on even when the Democrat Party aren't there. They are looking at solutions to this stuff. They have got ways to deal with it. I feel like we've become very short-termist in the UK. We're very reactive to different economic struggles. We're not really thinking about what we're going to be doing in 20 years' time. And I think that's affected the way the civil service think about things. We give the civil service a hard time, but the one important job they do fulfill is continuancy. Right? They're there when the government leaves. So their job in the last 20 years has become so stretched and warped by all of what I would call this kind of woke agenda that's coming through. It's taken up so much of their time, if that makes sense. They haven't had time to focus on the real issues like economics. And so we're suffering a little bit because they cared more about DEI than they did about where our money's going.
Well, I mean, look, if you go and look at what the most important issue for voters is the economy. But really, when you look at the top 10 issues, most of them relate to money and the economy.
Yeah.
Everything else is a distraction.
Well, even immigration, which is topping a lot of polls now, is directly because of economy.
Yeah, all of it comes down to, like, if people are feeling poor, they're feeling angry. If you're skipping a meal, or you can't take your kids out, you can't buy proper Christmas presents, or you can't heat your home, like these are fundamentals that a lot of us are lucky to have. But if these have been stripped away from people, they're just going to make people angry. And look, I've been reading a lot of, I've been going back a lot of US history. I've been reading the Federalist Papers and the establishment of the Constitution. And, the foresight these people have was incredible. But it was Jefferson who fully understood the risks of government debt, how that would lead to impoverishing a nation. If all these things, the receipts are there from history, yet every one of our Western liberal democracies now is falling down for these same mistakes over and over again. And I think the problem is we don't have an educated public. I think every Labour voter has a poor economic framework. They just don't understand economics. If they did understand the basics of economics, they know they would be voting not only for paying for themselves, but for the net country as a whole.
Oh, it ties back into the word comfort, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think, you in this day and age, you've got to get a little bit uncomfortable if you really want to.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the internet there. It's 2 clicks away from serious discomfort. You can read about anything you want, any topic you want. You can see anything you want on the internet, which is a blessing and a curse, right? Because it takes away a lot of our innocence and our enjoyment of life as human beings a lot of the time. But it also opens up this treasure trove of knowledge. You don't have to have a particularly high IQ to go and find out what is happening around you. You don't have to have a university education. You can be a very commonplace, ordinary person working a very ordinary job. And there's absolutely no barrier to you to access something that 50 years ago would have been kept from you for your entire lifetime. Now, I'm not saying there's not also a lot of disinformation online, because there is, and I'd be the first to admit that. But you can find verifiable sources on pretty much anything.
But you have to know what you're looking for.
You have to know what you're looking for. But when we think about economics, you might at least want to know what they do with your money. All right, you might at least want to know what your alternatives are in a financial crash. I mean, because these are very basic things. Again, I used the reference point of about 50 years ago. At that point in time, no one was thinking under a certain economic limit about what their assets were. They weren't thinking about, they might think about owning a house, but that would be their one solid asset. Everything else was completely in flux, right? And they were probably living off the basis of how many kids they had and off the basis of what they were going to pass down to their grandkids, right? They weren't thinking in tangible, financial terms. They weren't thinking, okay, well, what do I have in my crypto wallet at the moment? They weren't thinking about, none of those possibilities were there. You couldn't make money off the money you had. That's why the people who were working on Wall Street did so well, and why the poor man stayed poor, right? But now we've got this entire new class of assets, of possibilities to learn, to make money work.
That. Well, so yes, essentially we should have that. But this comes to one of the things that makes me most angry is that we have accredited investor rules to allow people to invest, which are basically rule out the majority of the country because you have to have whatever it is, a minimum of 100 grand a year earnings or $500,000 in assets. They've cut off the on-ramps to Bitcoin specifically, which I always say to people, if you can hold money for 4 years, Bitcoin is a good option. So all people have really had is this ability to buy one house and then a second house. Yeah. That's really what exists. But that's now being squeezed out because a lot of people can't get even onto the first house. But everybody is allowed to download as many gambling apps as you want and gamble your money away. It is like I wonder sometimes, is this organic or is it evil? Like is this organic, or are people actually sitting there thinking, no, we have to keep the peasants
the
away?
pharmaceutical argument.
What's that?
The pharmaceutical argument, rather, which is that are you looking at something that is genuinely for your good, or are you looking at something that's advertising? All right, because doctors back in the 1940s were saying that smoking was great for your lungs.
It's good for losing weight.
Good for losing weight. Well, it is good for losing weight. Can be. But anybody who has that much of a track record, I think about my nan, right? She's 96 now and doing great.
Go on.
Yeah. And she's had a little bit of red wine and she lived a good life and she's Welsh, which probably helps.
Yeah.
But when it came to taking the COVID vaccine, she said, no way. I mean, already in her 90s at this point. And some of my family were quite for it. Some were quite against. And we said, well, why do you think that? She said, I lived through thalidomide.
Some people won't even know what you're talking about.
No, they won't know what I'm talking about, right?
If he's listening,
yeah, well, exactly.
Tell my son, because he listens.
So this was a drug that was put out onto the market supposedly to cure morning sickness for women who were pregnant. And it ended up causing mass issues with pregnancies, deformities, abnormalities, in some cases death. And it was withdrawn from the market, and then it was put back out again in certain countries under a different brand name. And I believe it's still on the market in very, very limited supply. It's still accessible.
What, advertisers curing morning sickness?
No, they've got other cures. But this is the point.
Yeah,
it can all come back round again, right? Because they'll find new ways to repackage it. Look at what's happening now with the COVID vaccine. The BBC that bastion of truth and integrity, as I always say, they are finally admitting that there were vaccine harms and vaccine damages. Right, they haven't gone into the complexities of it and the scale of it, but the very fact that there's that admission, right, just proves that they had information all along that they weren't releasing. It's not just come around now.
Yeah.
It's just they finally picked it up off the file cabinet because it says, right, this month you can release that. I know how journalism works. I was a journalist, right? You wait. Everything is a time cycle. Okay, is it topical? Well, that shouldn't be the first question. It should be, do you care about the millions of people who potentially lost or are going to lose their lives? But that doesn't come into it. Is it topical? Will it get clicks? Will it paint us in a good or bad light? It goes back to the political check marks, right? People aren't thinking about the moral argument first. They're thinking about the optical argument and then the marketing argument and then the clicks and views argument. And then finally, oh, how does this impact people? It's such a backwards, twisted system.
It's very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
I got vaccinated, and it's one of my biggest regrets. I fell for a lot of the COVID arguments. I fell for the lockups to begin with.
Yeah.
I'd gone out to Turkey to make a documentary when Erdogan was trying to send all the immigrants across into Greece. So I went out to make a documentary. As I left, Boris closed the borders. So it was like the day after. And I came back through and I got really sick. And I was following the documentaries that we made in Italy, and I fell for it. But I don't even know if it's falling for it, because I think it did. It was a unique situation for a lot of people at the time. Only when you think critically, you realize you can't stop this thing. But anyway, I kind of fell for that. And then I fell for the jab. I needed to go to Ireland and see my dad. I wasn't fearful of the jab at all. I was like, I've had multiple vaccinations. My doctor said absolutely fine. I didn't get it for my kids though. Interesting. My doctor said, "Look, you'll be fine. Don't. There's no point getting it for your kids."
No.
It was only 6 months later when I see my doctor who said, "Actually, no top ups."
You had a good doctor.
Look, I had an honest doctor. He himself at the time, he felt there was no risk with the COVID vaccine. He obviously took the information he'd taken. I just wish I'd been more skeptical, and I just wasn't.
So I very nearly wasn't, but I ended up falling down a rabbit hole thanks to the first lockdown.
You're going to live longer than me.
I don't know about that. It's not just the vaccine that causes early death, but there's, and also I would say as well, I think one thing we're finding out about the vaccine is that you can detox from it, which is good news.
How?
There's a couple of things on the
veins?
market. I'm not going to put my name put my name on medical recommendations. But yeah, no, there's some good stuff out there. It's worth researching. But one thing the first day one of COVID, I got the tip off from somebody that I was working with that lockdown was happening tomorrow. I was living in a flat in central London by myself. I would have probably gone mad, jumped off a balcony 3 weeks into lockdown. So I was like, no, I'm going to go up to see my parents in the West Midlands, spend some time in the countryside.
Yeah, perfect.
Great shout. But on the way out of London, I got on the tube. Tubes were still allowed that day. They weren't 2 days later, unless you had a business reason. There was some guy coughing his lungs up and he looked unwell, very unwell. This guy was in serious distress. And I was thinking, because I'd seen the videos, people writhing and frothing on tables and all this kind of thing coming out of China, which wasn't true. But,
I know.
The internet does that to you. So I was sort of, up here, I didn't have any masks. So I was like keeping everything. But then as soon as I got to Shropshire, which is where I'm from originally, I realised that no one else was ill. And obviously it hadn't travelled as far as it did eventually travel. But all the time that I was there, no one I knew got sick. I got it once, but that was in the third mini lockdown back when I was in London. Right, and it wasn't great. And it gave me some permanent not permanent, but semi-permanent side effects like losing sense of smell. I couldn't smell for about 3 years, 3 years.
Oh, wow.
I could smell things, but it was all weird and not quite there, which was a very odd knock-on effect because I never lost my sense of taste.
One of my friends lost his sense of taste. I didn't. I had it twice. I had it confirmed.
You're not meant
once.
to be able to lose one without the other. So this is what made me start questioning whether or not.
Depends which strain then.
Yeah, strains, whether or not it's a biological agent, all of this kind of stuff. But when I was up there, I sort of thought, this doesn't seem like it's real. And I started on that premise, going down a rabbit hole of trying to find out what was actually happening politically and all the rest of it. And I came to the conclusion that there was something really going around. But I quickly realized that what was happening with the lockdowns was either a massive overreaction or a massive underreaction. This was the thing that clicked in my head halfway through. It's like, if this thing is as bad as you say it is, it's kind of nothing we can do. And if it's not as bad as you say it is, why are we doing this?
Yeah, I understand your point.
Right? And everybody I spoke to, even after COVID, kind of had the same reaction, which is like, well, you know, even people who are virologists and that kind of thing, they've said, well, the lockdown argument could work in certain circumstances, depends on the, you know, how transmissible it is and the way it jumps and all the rest of it. But if you're going to do that, you'd have had to shut all flights in and out day one, off, everything off, apart from logistics. There couldn't have been anything going in and out of the country. And you'd have had to have a completely internalized economy that could have opened up and done things like Sweden did, so that you made sure that you were working all of your germs out. Because what happened after COVID, we all got ill.
Yeah, I know.
Right? Because none of us have been sharing germs for about 3 or 4 years. So I quite quickly realized this. And I guess from there on, I was, you know, whatever you want to call me now, anti-vax.
Yeah. Somebody put it to me once that I wish I'd thought about this at the very start. They said, the only way you can stop the spread of COVID is to shut down air.
Yeah.
It's like you can't shut down air. And
No.
look, I could take a soft argument at the start. That's like, we need a small shutdown to prepare the hospitals. I knew a doctor who was working in, I can't remember the hospital in London. I did an interview with him. It's out there. And you know, they went from a trickle of people to queues to declare an emergency, I think was in about 24 hours, and people are struggling to breathe. There was clearly an issue. There was something
an issue, and it was really concentrated in cities. But I'll tell you one other thing. When I was speaking to a nurse who lived next door during the lockdown, she worked in a hospital in one of the nearby towns, and she said that they were on emergency footing. They had been for weeks. I said, "Oh, right, how many cases have you had?" Well, we haven't had any yet, but the next hospital, which is Stoke-on-Trent, they've had loads. They've had loads. They're telling us they're going to send some down. I spoke to her a few weeks later. How many cases have you had? Well, we've had one now.
Okay.
This one was working night shifts on emergency stationing all the way through the pandemic. Now, I'm not saying that the virus didn't exist because I caught it, right? So I know it existed. But what was happening in cities was nothing like what was happening in the countryside. There is a reason why the Florence Nightingale Hospital was never used, right? Which is that it was bad in concentrated areas, like every bout of bronchitis is, like every single seasonal flu. But it wasn't spreading in the way people thought it was, particularly to young people. It was to old people, and it was affecting them badly because every illness affects the elderly badly. So why then were they concentrating the elderly and putting them into homes where it spread like wildfire all the way through, if they knew that the only places where it was spreading were the most concentrated areas of society?
Yeah,
This is one of my questions, right? The whole thing, I'm not pointing fingers, but the whole thing, let's just be kind here and say it was nonsensical. From a purely medical point of view, so many of the decisions made were clearly not medical.
Do you think, do you then, obviously you then veer over to that, it was an overreaction. Do you think part of it is, you know, there's a moment in time where something feels like a national emergency and you get to step forward as a politician and be strong and lead the country?
I think it was the perfect ego moment
for
who we had in charge at the time. Same thing with Ukraine, I might add. Right, there's a lot of elements of Ukraine up for discussion. And you can talk all day long about, you know, the security risk, what Putin would or wouldn't do. But the way we seized on all of those crises, the way Boris was quick to lead us into all of them, proves to me that it was political capital. Because a pragmatic leader says, number one, I don't want people to die. Well, he was saying not only let the bodies pile high, which is typical of Boris, but also let's get into a war. I mean, what leader consequentially leads people into a war on purpose? They might do it.
Tony Blair.
Yeah, don't utter that name. He might be around somewhere. But that's my point, right? Even with Tony and Dick Cheney and all those guys, it was all about what they were going to get out of it.
Sure. I mean,
Right.
Tony Blair.
So what was Boris going to get out of it? Was he going to get a very welcome distraction to everything that was going on around him, which was that the Tory government already by 2019, people forget this, was beginning to be hated. One of the reasons why it survived so long was partly because of COVID. It also got unpopular because of the financial spending after COVID, but it stayed in power because there was no appetite really for political change. No one was going to go out and vote in a new government in a time of crisis.
Yeah. There's appetite now.
Oh, there is now.
By the way, I should say, I think it's now become socially acceptable to discuss COVID publicly. You aren't some crazy right-wing conspiracy theorist.
The BBC finally have allowed us to.
But it took a long time. So traveling out to the US, it came out. It was socially acceptable a lot earlier.
Yeah.
Socially here, it's taken time.
It's taken time, yeah. And I think it's also, again, goes back to the comfort point. Yeah, again, we don't like uncomfortable conversations.
Okay, well, look, the budget's now. I think we should watch it.
This government was given a mandate to restore stability to our economy and to begin a decade of national renewal. Yeah. To fix the foundations and deliver change. I can confirm that we will accept the Low Pay Commission recommendation to increase the national living wage by 6.7% to £12.21 an hour. Worth up to £1,400 a year for a full-time worker. I am announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions. We will increase the rate of employers' national insurance by 1.2 percentage points to 15% from April 2025. And we will reduce the secondary threshold, the level at which employers start paying national insurance on each employee's salary, from £9,100 a year to £5,000. Today, we will increase the lower rate of capital gains tax from 10 to 18%, and the higher rate from 20 to 24%. I will today provide 40% relief on business rates for the retail, hospitality and leisure industry in 2025-26, up to a cap of £110,000 per business. We will abolish the non-dom tax regime. There will be no extension of the freeze in income tax and national insurance thresholds beyond the decisions by the previous government. From 2028-29, personal tax thresholds will be uprated in line with inflation once again. The scale and seriousness of the situation that we have inherited cannot be underestimated. Together, the hole in our public finances this year, which recurs every year.
Right. I kept loads of notes. Wasn't as bad as I expected.
No, I mean,
I think she's done all right.
it was interesting because it was very, very clear where she was starting from. She was making sure that, you're all on side, and we kept waiting for something. There was meant to be a jump scare all the way through. I think the biggest groan was probably around the contributions.
Well, so I think that's where she's been clever. So the cap gains, she's changed the lower rate from 10 to 18%, and the higher rate from 20 to 24%. So anybody who has assets, which is a small portion of the country, it's not enough. I don't think that fully tests the Laffer curve. Like if they'd have brought it in 40%, people go, well, fuck this, I'm off.
It was also the way that she made sure we knew which other countries we were still ahead of.
Of course. But also the national insurance one was quite interesting in that she's raised it to 15% and dropped the threshold when you start paying from £9,100 to £5,000. That's instantly, oh, fuck.
Yeah, I mean, the overall story is growth is down, spending is up, taxes are up. So it's not a good budget, but the way they packaged it was very clever. Yeah,
I mean, but also on that national insurance, we didn't see the threshold, but not for small businesses. So it's kind of like what's quite interesting about it, it doesn't actually, it feels closer to the centre ground.
I think what they're trying to do is basically say, look, what came before us was so bad this is why you've all got to suffer a little bit, but we're not going to make it any worse for you. So that's the logic they've had to follow. But the one thing I would say is that if you look at, for instance, on the inheritance tax side of things, the way that's going to affect small farms is just insane. I mean, no one has a farm that's just worth £1 million. So you've immediately put small family farms out of business after this generation.
Do you
it's quite sizable.
You probably know this well better than me. We've had kind of weeks and weeks of rumours of what's coming in the budget, and it sounded scary. Two questions. One, are there leaks to test the reaction to policies? And secondly, are there leaks to make things sound worse so when they finally deliver it, it's not as bad? It's like, oh, you've kind of been like, I've been like, oh, it's not 40% cap gains, it's 24%, but yeah, it is still 24%.
Yeah, I mean, the way people normally work is with focus groups, right? So they're going to test the water and see what the reaction is to a certain policy, probably within confines of an opinion poll or a market research group or whatever it is that they use. Labour will probably have a different methodology to the Tories, but I think what's been happening is that the rhetoric has been so heated from Reform and from Generic, saying, look, you've got communists in power, which they do, but these guys aren't stupid. They're not going to just announce communism overnight. It doesn't. Hi guys, here we are. So it's all sugar-coated. And it doesn't sound too bad. But if you dig into the details, I mean, there are things that are going to hit people straight away.
Of course.
Particularly working class people, particularly people in small businesses.
At Ledden, we built the best Bitcoin-backed loan platform in the world. Proven, trusted, growing. Ledden's proven track record speaks for itself. Visit ledden.io/Mr. Obnoxious to get started. Ledden, there is no second best. Ledden is not regulated in the United Kingdom. Any credit products or virtual asset services provided by Ledden are not subject to UK regulatory protections. Please consider the risks associated with virtual assets and consult a financial advisor before making any decisions.
Well, it is an increase in taxes, first and foremost.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got an increase in taxes. And a lot of their promises are down the line. Some of the things I'll be interested to see is I try to keep these notes as hard all the time. But it was like, okay, so inflation, the target's 2.5% this year, 2.6% next year, 2.5%, 2.1%, 2.1%. So that's 5 years of close to 2% inflation.
Yeah.
I just personally don't see that happening because borrowing is going to be increasing. And if borrowing is going to increase, they've got to service the debt.
Also, there were so many sort of announcements within the budget about where extra money is going. But every time she said, oh, we're making a saving here, oh, you're paying tax, you get that. It was all small numbers. It was all like, okay, well, we saved 2 billion here, we saved 20 billion here over the course of the next 5 years. Well, where are you going to get your immediate cash flow to pump all this?
127 billion.
I mean, there was one of those, which was it? Was it reparations for the blood scandal?
Yes.
I think
18.2 billion.
Yeah, something like, or 11 billion, something like that. I mean, that's
11 point
something billion, I think it was.
11.8 billion.
11.8 billion. That's a lot of money. So that plus the post office was 1.8.
Yeah.
So we're up to 13 billion. Right. So that's already 13 billion taken out of the 20 billion that you've saved on this small tax increment. So where's your big money coming from?
Well, she did say borrowing is going to be 127 billion, which is high because if you think, a tax receipt's about 1 trillion.
That's my point. It's going to be from borrowing.
Yeah.
It's not going to be from any kind of capital gain.
Yeah.
And
that's how you hide it.
Also the priorities. So we're putting, what was it, 3.9 billion into our defence spending for next year. Great. Oh, and we're sending 4 billion of aid to the Ukraine. All right, that's interesting. So we've got 8 billion spare there. And then we're putting 11 billion into these reparations. So suddenly, where are your priorities, right? Surely national defence comes somewhere higher up than anything else. Surely economy comes up somewhere higher. But everything it's all been coated in this emotional language. Oh, that's very nice. Oh, we're giving reparations away. Oh, that's brilliant. Oh.
Well, look, if they were reducing borrowing, I'd have been mildly impressed that they've managed to get away with this. Look, but the truth is, we know with governments is if they hit their threshold of what they can really tax people, they just go to borrowing. Yeah. It's just a different way of taxing people.
Yeah.
And that's my worry is that that we will just see a massive increase in borrowing. And the problem is we're not going to know for a year, 2 years, 3 years.
It's going to be very similar to what happened with Sunak, I think.
Yeah.
I don't like you said, the point you made at the beginning, this is quite centrist, is very similar to what the Tories were doing. It's not that different. Of course, there are some more socialist policies in this, like inheritance tax as an example, but borrowing rate is going to be similar. Where they're going to bring in new business from as well. The non-dom tax is interesting.
Yeah.
Or suddenly, sexy fish is going to have less clients.
Yeah. It's a shit restaurant anyway.
It's terrible.
It's terrible.
It's very overpriced.
And that one next to it, was it Amazonica?
I haven't been in there, but yeah.
They're both terrible.
But yeah, so there'll be small changes, but I noticed that there wasn't too much talk about renewable energy. There was a little bit, obviously, within the energy section of the budget, but they didn't go overkill with it.
They got the 22 billion of carbon capture.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about it.
Hydrogen, which is very expensive.
13 plants?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how much hydrogen energy you're going to get from that, but that'll be interesting to see who got given the grant to open those up.
Yeah. I think they'd be quite smart. It's a tough one to really fully attack.
There's no gaping wound. It's just it's a general feeling of trickle on. We're still losing money throughout the course of this.
I think the Conservatives will struggle to attack this.
Yeah, Reform are probably already having a field day.
Yeah.
I've seen some of their social media popping up.
What are they saying?
Well, a lot of it is like 40 billion in taxes going up, all this kind of thing. They're putting actual numbers on it, which I think is smart. But then it's also about, this huge kind of open goal question about the green agenda, which runs all the way through this. I mean, you've got so much money trickling out. I think they costed it. The cost to the taxpayer for the internal combustion engine ban by 2030, which has obviously been pushed back slightly now, but originally would have been about 226 billion.
Well, the tricky thing with that is, because I was listening to this talk the other day about the introduction of a pay-by-mile tax.
Yeah, which Sadiq has said he definitely won't do.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this, why would you do this? No one would accept it. But the point they made was we're moving to electric vehicles at a time when we're a fully electric fleet. They won't have any fuel duty, and it's not like they won't want their money from elsewhere.
You know what's even better? There's another plan for a pay-by-mile for electric vehicles that they've been considering.
Well, I assume this is it. This is their preparation.
So it's financial. It's nothing to do with energy. It's nothing to do with climate.
Yeah.
All of it is to do with financial gain, right? So the more clean air zones they can erect, the more new ways they've got of charging you for having a car, particularly if it does come to the point where they're starting to tax people on old cars, on vintage cars, that kind of thing, you've got to question whether or not it's really about, saving the planet.
Well, my assumption always is where can we get more money? Everything is where can we get more money?
Everything is to do with money. But the funny thing is, this budget doesn't really look at where you can get more money from.
Well, it doesn't look at, she did talk about 2% target of productivity and efficiency gains within departments. That's what they've said.
Across the civil service and government.
Sure.
Yeah.
But there's no talk of a reduction in the size of government. I fundamentally believe we just need a reduction in the size of government. Government is just too big.
Yeah. Well, especially when you look at some of the departments, they are Mickey Mouse departments. The Secretary for Culture, Sport, Media. That's, it sounds like some of these higher education degrees that are beginning to pop up.
Just thinking about reform, some of the criticisms of them is that their budget plans weren't fully costed and perhaps are a little bit naive and from a place of not understanding how to run government. Anything fair in that at all?
I think there's something fair to be said in not knowing how to run government because you don't know what you're up against until you get in. I don't think there were too many problems with their figures. I think some of them were probably slightly inflated. But the thing is, when you're creating something, it's like that. It's kind of a tenuous wish list. It's not really when Labour and the Tories do a manifesto, they know that they're going to probably use it, right? Reform are doing what they want to see government look like if they were in. They're not saying we are going to be the government. So they're a lot more open to suggestion as they go, which is a blessing and a curse, right? Because they've got to get that right. They've got to take the right advice. But I think most of the plans that they put forward would work. It's just you might not get the numbers that they're saying you get out of it, but it would be a significant benefit to the economy. So it's a balance of, does anyone really fixate on what the exact numbers are? I think Rachel was probably throwing some numbers out of out of her ass all the way through that. So
That's a good joke. That's a good joke. I was discussing this with somebody recently. I kind of wish our general election was based on budgets, not manifestos. That they submit a budget and we vote based on a budget.
Sure. Yeah.
You can attach a manifesto of everything else to the end of it, but once
a manifesto and a budget should be the same thing, really.
Yeah, but it should be held to it.
Yeah, because ideally in a country like ours, the only role of government really is to work out where the money should be being distributed.
Yeah, but there's an incentive to become a lot more efficient and lower taxes if your election is based on the budget. Yeah. And I don't think people are so naive they just go for the lowest taxes. But ultimately, it switches the incentives. But there are complications in what happens if there's coalitions or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a weird one. I need to kind of digest it because it's definitely going to make my life. I'm going to pay more cap gains tax. My kids are my daughter's in private school, so that I know that we already know that's going up 15.2%. I'm sure there's people listening who, well, fuck you, you can afford it.
Yeah.
And I've also got the rise in the national minimum wage to 12. So I can't remember.
So it was £10 for the younger age group.
Yeah, but I can't remember what it previously was, but it's at 6.7%. But
was it 11? It was 11 something.
So we pay 12 anyway in my bar,
yeah.
So we put it higher. So ours will probably go up to 13 just to kind of cover that. But that exists. I don't like their extension of employment rights. So this is going to sound weird, but some people won't understand this. I prefer the US system, whereby if you want to get rid of somebody, you get rid of them. I think that puts the changes incentive for the person to perform, rather than be protected by law. Because what tends to happen is if you have to sometimes get rid of people, you have to navigate this complex set of rules whereby you can end up being sued. It's just ridiculous. If people are no good, just get rid of them.
Yeah. Well, another point as well is this 5% stamp duty on second homes, because this is going to kill landlords. Right, they're just not going to think about it, a lot of them. If they were thinking about making an investment in a second home so they could rent it out. And that could be a blessing and a curse, again.
Well, I guess it's a good for their base who are saying they can't, like my son. Sure. My son can't
get on housing.
Yeah, can't get on housing. The only way he can do it is if I help him.
Yeah. I think that's the same with all families now.
No, it's certainly not. But also, I personally, there's no incentive to invest in a second home.
No, I'm saying for kids.
Oh, okay.
This is the same across the board. So they're not going to be buying homes at the moment as it is. For those who want to invest, I've got a friend who's, I think, mid-20s, something like that. He's already managed to buy a house and use it as an investment.
Right.
So that is obviously an incentive for some people. And going into the 30s, they want to create a property portfolio. They want to get on doing that. They've now got to pay 5% on every future home they purchase.
Just buy Bitcoin. It's much easier.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I'm going to go away and digest this. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think it was it was funny.
Yeah.
I'll give her that.
She was
she was surprisingly witty. Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as say charismatic, but witty. Yeah.
No, I think she was firm because it was
quite headmistress style, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the point is, you mentioned it's an open goal by the Conservatives have been dreadful, absolutely terrible, and so there's no part of me that feels defensive about the Conservative parties because fuck them, they did a terrible job, but I expected something terrible, and I was like, okay, you've been firm, you've been kind of funny, and on the face of it, some of this seems okay and sensible if you accept the role of government is to redistribute income. Ultimately, I just want politics which makes government smaller and reduces the tax burden. But if for my Labour friends, I would struggle to go and have a solid argument with them.
It's neutralising and bland, which is Keir Starmer in a nutshell, isn't it? So as long as he can keep that facade up for long enough and he doesn't go too far down the rhetorical rabbit hole of what he used to believe under Jeremy Corbyn, then he should be all right. He should be all right for another 6 months.
Well, they think they've got 10 years. They're pitching for the second...
10 years, I know. That was quite bold, wasn't it?
Twice you mentioned it.
Yeah.
What's that second term?
Yeah.
Well, Joe, look, great to meet you. I'm sure we'll do this again at some time. This was fascinating. Thanks for listening, everybody. See you later.